Welcome to Perspectives, a special presentation of the Power of the Patient Project. Today's guest is Dr. Darryl Inaba. And now, here is your host, Charlotte Grinnell.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Grinnell, and welcome to Perspectives presented by the Power of the Patient Project. My guest today is Dr. Darryl Inaba, PharmD, who is recognized internationally as one of the foremost authorities on drugs and addiction. He is the former CEO and president of San Francisco's Haight Ashbury Free Clinic, an organization he helped found in the 1960s. He is the owner and research director of CNS Productions, Inc., and the director of clinical and behavioral health sciences at Addictions Recovery Center. He is the author of Uppers, Downers, All-Arounders, a popular textbook used at NET Institute and 400 plus colleges nationwide, plus various articles and award-winning educational films on various aspects of addiction science. He has been honored with over 90 individual awards for his work in the areas of prevention and treatment of substance abuse problems. He is a popular speaker at workshops and conferences nationally and internationally. Welcome, Dr. Inaba. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Charlotte. It's wonderful to be on your Power to the Patient program.
Yes, thank you so much. So as I mentioned, you are the Director of Clinical and Behavioral Health Sciences Services at Addictions Recovery Center, where you oversee substance use and mental health disorder treatment. What is the Addiction Recovery Center's main methodology with treating their patients?
Well, we're lucky here. I think in Southern Oregon, we have a serious drug problem, as every place does, but we have some fairly good programs. It's not enough to cover the needs of people who need services in this area. And the Addictions Recovery Services, under the tutorship originally of Chris Mason, and now our CEO is Lori Paris, have tried to create a whole campus, a complete wraparound campus of services that will help give people the best chance at recovery. We have, I think, one of the few places between probably Eugene, Oregon, and Redding, Sacramento, California, that has medically managed detox and medically managed residential treatment services. We're registered as 3.7 residential treatment. We have residential treatment for both male and female, segregated by gender. And we have full outpatient services from intensive outpatient to outpatient. We have basically sobering center, DUI center. We have mental health services. We have gambling services. We also have a domestic violence services. So we try and provide as many things that clients can move into and continue on to get the best chance to get at recovery. And that's what our goal is toward moving people and clients toward full recovery.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys do so many different things for so many different people, which is so great. And in your LinkedIn bio, I saw that you had a personal quote of yours, and you said, "My own experiences have convinced me that accurate, non-judgmental, and comprehensive knowledge about psychoactive drugs and their effect is the most effective method of preventing substance abuse problems." Could you elaborate on the importance of approaching substance abuse problems without judgment?
Absolutely. I wrote that, and I started my work in this field during the 1960s. And basically, drugs were totally demonized. They were just demonized by the media and by the general public, and drug users were so stigmatized as being losers or bad or criminal and that kind of thing. And basically, that resulted in preventing clients from actually looking at themselves and availing themselves and engaging in treatment services. So it's been my quest ever since to bring out as much information as possible on the basis that they can engage with and understand that this condition affects the best of the best, and basically is a chronic progressive relapsing disorder, in that people do engage in recovery. Of course, you don't recover, you're always recovering, but they have tremendous benefits from managing their condition, and they have tremendous quality of life and continue to contribute tremendous things to our communities. And the information that we have and continue to have, the science and basic being able to now actually look at brain cells talk to each other and look at the chemistry of the brain is such that when clients as well as the general public become more aware of that, I think it really does destigmatize and help people, move people in our communities toward a recovery effort.
Yes, definitely. And I love that philosophy. And I think that that's something that everyone should keep in mind, that it's not something that's a chosen thing for people. It's something that it is a very hard thing for people to struggle with. And so the coronavirus pandemic has been an uncertain, isolating time for many people. How has the current situation affected those who struggle with substance abuse?
Oh, it's impacted us greatly, as a recent study published in the Journal of American Medical Association has shown that overdoses on a weekly basis in the United States during the pandemic has increased 45%, 45% more overdoses. There are less treatment approaches. We're restricted in terms of treatment. Our outpatient services have been greatly effective. We're trying to do all virtual as we can, but virtuals I don't think are as effective, although clients really like them because they don't have to come in or anything. But with that, relapses are extremely high. Residential services have been cut in half because of the spacing and the social distancing and protective plans we have to put in place for that. So basically, overdose, addiction, and drug abuse have increased while treatment opportunities have decreased, and that's a real tragic thing.
Yes, definitely. And so you're the author of, as I mentioned, the textbook, Uppers, Downers, and All-Arounders. If you could pick one message or piece of information that you hope that readers learn from your textbook, what would it be?
I think probably the most important part of my book for the past 50 years, actually, is that it really lays out the biology, the medical process, the actual anomalies, I call them, differences in a person that makes them vulnerable to addiction, and the anomalies of addiction, which actually I feel hijacks the basic brain's survival. We all have a survival instinct. Every creature has a survival instinct, and addiction hijacks that survival instincts. And it's brought about by differences in the brain chemistry, brought about sometimes by genetics, sometimes by environmental stress and trauma, and sometimes by just the toxicity of drugs. But they all conspire to change brain cells, brain chemistry, and the connections between brain cells that hijack a person's survival instincts. And that it's not about the person. The actually important thing is that all the studies I've looked at and I've done myself have shown that if you meet medical diagnostic criteria, not everybody's going to be an addict. Not everybody's going to be an addict. And only, say, 15% of people who drink alcohol ever in their life will meet medical diagnostic criteria for problem drinking. 23% of people who try heroin will meet medical diagnostic criteria for opiate use disorder. So not everybody's going to be an addict. And in those people who do meet our assessment and our diagnostic criteria, all of the research that I talk about in my book and I continue to search out and seek out shows that those people, although they have this vulnerability, are also tremendously blessed. They have they're smarter. They have a higher IQ. They're more sensitive. They're more aware. They have creative skills. They have awareness, sensitivity. Most of all, they have tremendous charisma. Sometimes not a good thing, maybe, but they have tremendous charisma, and that's a great thing that they need to use to help destigmatize themselves. They begin to feel that they're bad or losers, and they meant to do this. And the first 300,000 patients I actually supervised in treatment at the Haight Ashbury Clinic in San Francisco, 93% were self-referred. That's a stunning statistic that people don't realize. You know, nobody starts out to be an addict. They start out, you know, having fun or doing certain things, but addiction is a horrible thing. When it occurs, people are desperate to try and do something about it. And if treatment was available to them, I think a lot of people would seek it out. And if they engage in recovery, that's the miracle. We see all these miracles happen. I think that's what sustains us in this field.
Yeah, and I'm sure that, the portrayal of substance abuse in the media doesn't help with the stigma attached to it, because I'm sure that it's not accurate. And that, so how can you've touched on this a couple times, but what can people do to kind of help to destigmatize the around the substance abuse and all the stigma attached to it?
Gee, despite all the progress, and even now National Geographic's in 2017 at the end had a theme article on the science of addiction. They actually had it on the cover. Time magazine had a theme article on science. In the past, conventional media would portray the overdose person, just the total horrendous thing of drug abuse on their covers and stuff. But now I think standard or conventional media is beginning to look at this as a true scientific situation, as a true illness. And you would think that would destigmatize it. I certainly hoped it would, but that stigma continues to persist. The science that continues to be produced and continues to be uncontrovertible about showing that addiction is very much a chronic persistent disorder, very much like diabetes, very much like asthma, very much like hypertension. And the science of that is so strong that in 2008, both houses of Congress and President George W. Bush signed into law the Addiction Equity Act of 2008. So the law recognizes that addiction is a true medical disorder. People with addiction actually can qualify for Americans with Disability Act. It's not a good way of going, but they can do that with permanent life disabilities. But despite that passage and all these years since it passed, a recent study came out in 2020 that looked at the states and how they were implementing and how they were using the Addiction Equity Act. It was there to increase treatment. It's saying that addicts are just like diabetics. They deserve as much of our treatment resources as somebody with hypertension or heart disease. Despite that, only one state was actually doing much about implementing the regulations of those acts, and that was Illinois. A few states were trying to do some stuff, but the vast majority of states, including mine, Oregon, have done nothing, have absolutely done nothing, and there's no enforcement of those regulations, so they continue. Maybe if we can sort of lobby and get people to understand there is a law. It says people with addictions aren't criminals, they aren't bad, they aren't stupid, they aren't crazy, they're people with tremendous talent and value that they can provide us in our communities if we treat and look at it as a biological condition. And so I think that needs to be done. There was actually a film made a few years ago that's fairly cheap and available. It's a video DVD called Anonymous People. And Anonymous People is validating what I've seen in lots of research, even longitudinal research out of England, in which James Haight was actually given 10,000 births in 1970s, in which he had the research duty to follow these people until they reached the age of 30, and testing them for IQ, testing what their social interactions was, all kinds of metrics that he came up. And he validated what we've all been seeing, that basically he was, by the end, when was it, about 2000 and maybe 18 or so, he published his research. He's able to hold on to 8,700 or so of his original 10,000, which is amazing longitudinal research. You hold on to those people for 30 years. And he divided his research subjects by gender. He looked at males versus females. And then he was able to just divide them by IQ, just by IQ. Those who tested routinely at 100, that you're right in the middle of your age group intelligence at 100. And those who tested 108 or higher, an 8-point swing in IQ is a very huge swing. If you get poisoned by lead or injured in your head, your IQ will drop about 8 points. That's how wide range that the intellectual capacity is. And he found in his research after they reach the age of 30, males who routinely tested at the higher IQs were twice as likely to have had or were currently addicts and alcoholics. Females who were at higher IQ were 3 times more likely to be addicts and alcoholics. So basically, that anonymous people is showing these people in recovery, which are not like the stigma. You know, people, when you think of an alcoholic, you generally think, because of the media and because of the stigma, of the public inebriate, the wino, person in the gutter, broken bottle, vomit all over himself. But studies in this country from our Office of National Drug Control Policy, our drugs are, when he looked at that, he found that less than 5% of known alcoholics ever fit that stereotypical picture. Well, that said, well, what do alcoholics look like? Well, they can look like your physician, they can look like your nurse, they can look like your judge, they can look like your probation officer, they can look like your pilot when you get on an airplane, they can look like the magnets of business and of science and everything else. And that's what anonymous people was doing. They were showing there was a sort of an undercurrent in that. It was about an hour and a half video, which says that they should get rid of animosity. They should get rid of anonymous. They should just out every addict and alcoholic, because the recovering addict and alcoholics are people who contribute tremendous amount to our society. They're the best in science, they're the best in music, they're the best in acting, they're the best in law, they're the best in senators and representatives, they're the best of the best. And they said if that would help reduce the stigma, I don't know if we want to go that far and sort of outing every addict and alcoholic, but there is a lot of truth to that, that there are, the stigma continues because we don't appreciate that people who have tremendous talent and have tremendous value to offer to our society really have this condition. And when those people accept, and what I'm trying to do with my book and everything I do is accept that they have a condition. It's like if you get diagnosed for hypertension, you might not even know you had it, right? You're just going on in life, and your doctor tells you. But at that point, you have to make 2 decisions. You have to make a choice. You can continue to ignore your condition of hypertension because you don't feel sick. You don't feel bothered. Actually, you felt better when they didn't treat you with those blood pressure lowering medications. You feel great. And if you don't treat it, and that condition is progressive, it's a chronic progressive disorder, you don't get any better. You get worse and worse, and you die a horrible death with a whole bunch of complications very early in your life, because hypertension will hurt your kidneys, hurt your heart, give you stroke, hurt your brain, hurt everything, and you die a much earlier death with lots of consequences. Well, addiction also is a chronic, persistent, progressive disorder. And if it's because you have a biology that's different, you have an anomaly, you have a different brain connections. And at that point, if you get diagnosed with that, then you have the same choice. You can ignore it, and it will continue to get worse and worse. And basically, everybody's saying you have catastrophic consequences. It impacts every part of your physical life as well as your social life, your emotional life. You just have catastrophic consequences, and we know 45% increase in overdoses. You're going to die a lot earlier. But if you accept it and then you manage it, you look at managing it. Actually, addiction is one of the most manageable conditions we have. When we look at comparing, say, relapse to addiction, say alcoholism, and compare that to relapse for treating people with hypertension, we actually have less relapses treating alcoholism. But when somebody relapses, when you treat high blood pressure, or when you treat asthma, or you treat panic disorder, nobody says you're horrible. You don't feel like you're a monster. You don't feel like, you're totally worthless and beat up. What you do is the doctors and the patient, they address what happened, and they try and get back into treatment and better management. They try and arrange different things so that the treatment is better. And that's what we need to do with addiction too. Addiction is a relapsing condition, and addicts have to learn how to manage it, and they want to minimize relapse. relapse is horrible and each one gets worse, but they want to minimize that, but they don't want it to be so disturbing when it happens that they end up ODing and continue use. We want them to get back in treatment as quickly as possible, engage in treatment, and treatment has to do things differently. We have to try something else. We have to try things we haven't done. We have to teach them different things, and hopefully the goal is long-term sobriety. We want people to gain long-term sobriety, and that's what we want to do. And so I think this stigma, I don't know how it's ever going to, because we've had a law. We have a law, we have a science. We know that the people who are affected are amongst the best of the best, and yet the stigma persists because I guess people want to look at addicts as being bad or weak or stupid or crazy.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that I personally have learned a lot through this interview, and I definitely want to check out that video that you said. I think that sounds really interesting. And I definitely agree with all that you're saying, that I think all the knowledge is there for people to destigmatize, but you actually have to put in also the effort to look into that stuff and to educate yourself on these topics. And even this interview, I think, can provide a lot. So thank you so much for doing this today and providing this really important information. I really appreciate it.
I think we have a responsibility, though, in the professional field, because the knowledge is out there, but it's not readily available. It's not put in an understandable way. I mean, I have to glean this stuff out of just tremendous amount of brain science, neuroscience, amount of statistical work that I'm not very comfortable with, but there's tremendous amount of research, and we have great researchers and leaders like Dr. Nora Vokow, NIDA, and Dr. Anna Rose Childress of Philadelphia, and people just doing tremendous work in this field, but we need to get that information out more and understandable so that people can really engage in it and move on.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And thank you again for taking the time out of your day to do this interview. Like I said, I learned a lot, and I hope that everyone watching has learned something as well. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for your program. I really like the power to the patient. It's in our day, power to the people, now it's power to the patient. So.